My colleague said I was leeching off my girlfriend. My name is Mason Hale, and I'll never forget the exact moment my colleague decided to turn me into the punchline of his little workplace comedy routine. It was 9:02 a.m., the weekly Monday stand-up stale coffee smell in the air, and Derek, Mr. I'm friends with everyone, was already in mid-story about his weekend. Out of nowhere, he turned to me and smirked. Guess Mason didn't have to do much. He's got Maya paying all the bills. It was just a throwaway comment to him, but in a quiet room full of people who know exactly what you earn, it was a scalpel. Someone snorted, someone else gave that tight-lipped smile people give when they're not sure if it's okay to laugh. I smiled back like I hadn't heard a thing, but I heard. And trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Ethan's Way. Now, get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. The meeting went on, Derek tossing out little jabs like it was his own personal roast. Every time my name came up in the task list, I could feel his eyes on me, waiting to see if I'd react. But I didn't. I kept my face neutral, nodding at the project update, scribbling notes. Inside, though, a thin, controlled fire had already started. Here's the thing, people think revenge is all about anger. It's not. Not the real kind anyway. The good kind is quiet, patient, precise. And I wasn't about to give Derek the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. By the time the meeting wrapped, the room had that faintly awkward aftertaste that happens when someone's crossed a line, but no one calls it out. Derek clapped me on the shoulder as we filed out. Hey man, just kidding. You know I'm playing right. I gave him a small smile. Of course, but what I didn't say was I'm not playing. Back at my desk, I pulled up the project dashboard, letting my hands move automatically while my mind replayed the last few months. Derek had always been a talker, but lately he'd been aiming his stories closer and closer to my personal life. I hadn't told him much, just that I'd moved in with Maya after my lease ended. The rest he filled in himself, stitching together gossip and whatever scraps he picked up from casual conversations. And in an office like ours, a mid-sized marketing analytics firm, stories spread fast. People don't fact-check over catered lunches. They just pass things along, polish the edges, and serve them to the next person. By the time it makes the rounds, a favor between partners turns into a full-blown tale of dependency. The truth was more complicated, but truth rarely makes for good gossip. By noon, I decided I wasn't going to address it, not directly. I've learned that the fastest way to look guilty is to over-explain. Instead, I'd let Derek keep talking, and while he did, I'd be building something else entirely. Step 1, track the spread. It's something I'd done in client work before monitoring how messaging moved through online networks. Now I was doing it offline. Who avoided eye contact in the kitchen? Who stopped looping me into brainstorm sessions? Who parroted Derek's phrasing right down to the living off Maya bit? I made mental notes and later actual notes in a private doc. Step 2, sharpen the receipts. Derek liked to think of himself as the creative guy, the ideas man. But ideas are slippery things easy to trace back if you know where to look. And I did. Every analysis I ran, every draft I worked on, I saved versions with subtle, traceable fingerprints. Not obvious watermarks too easy to spot, just tiny anomalies invisible to the untrained eye, but undeniable when pointed out. Step 3, keep the temperature low. Revenge isn't fire, it's ice. So when Derek slid into the seat next to mine at lunch that week and made another crack about how lucky I was to have a girlfriend who could afford my life, I laughed. Not too loud, just enough to make it seem harmless. Inside, though, the timeline was already set. He thought he'd gotten away with a good joke. What he didn't know was that I just started writing the opening scene of his downfall, and I wasn't going to rush it. I was going to make sure that when the moment came, every person who'd heard him laugh at my expense would be there to watch him choke on his own words. And that was the only thought that made the rest of that week bearable. The truth about how I got here wasn't something I liked to broadcast at work. Not because I was ashamed of it, but because I knew how people like Derek spun simple facts into cheap entertainment. It had been a brutal year. The layoff came fast and messy, one of those late Friday company reorganization calls, where the HR rep can't even look you in the eye. One minute, I was a rising analyst with 2 big accounts under my belt. The next, I was staring at a cardboard box of my desk stuff in the elevator. Rent doesn't care about your career hiccups, though. The landlord still wanted his check, and my savings weren't deep enough to weather months without income. That's when Maya stepped in. We'd been together a little over a year. She was an architectural designer working at a boutique firm with a steady client flow. One night while I was trying to crunch numbers at my kitchen table, she just said, it no hesitation, no pity in her voice. Move in with me. It's stupid for you to pay rent on your own when I've got space. I resisted. Pride's a tricky thing. I told her I didn't want to feel like I owed her, didn't want to be the guy who lived off his girlfriend. She raised an eyebrow and gave me that look, the one that reminded me she knew exactly how much I'd done for her when the roles were reversed. Because here's what Derek didn't know. 2 years ago, Maya was drowning in her final year of grad school. Her scholarship covered most of it, but there were months she couldn't afford groceries without cutting into rent. I was working overtime then, double shifts, taking freelance gigs just to make sure she didn't have to drop out. I'd quietly covered a chunk of her tuition gap, paid for her first portfolio prints, even stayed up all night coding her online portfolio when her laptop died. We never kept score. That was our unspoken rule. But now I was the one in the red. And every time I thought about moving in, my ego screamed at me to find another way. The truth is, I almost did. I interviewed for jobs I didn't want, took short-term contracts that barely covered utilities. It was Maya who finally sat me down and said, "You've been killing yourself trying to stand alone. Let someone stand with you for a change." That hit harder than I wanted to admit. So I moved in. We split bills based on income, hers covering the bigger chunk, until I got back on my feet. And when I finally landed the position at the marketing analytics firm, I thought that chapter was over. But Derek smelled blood in the water. The first time he made a comment about Maya, it was almost playful. "Man must be nice having a girlfriend who works in design. Bet your place looks like an art gallery." I laughed it off, but then it became, "Guess you're eating fancy dinners every night, and no wonder you're so relaxed, your girlfriend's probably taking care of the hard stuff." And then came the Monday stand-up, the line that solidified his story in everyone's head. By midweek, I started noticing the ripple effects. Colleagues who used to ask my opinion in meetings now skipped over me. People who once shared client leads stopped looping me in. Even casual lunch conversations shifted less about work, more about my sweet setup. It was ridiculous. They didn't see the nights Maya and I both worked late, barely crossing paths before bed. They didn't see me pulling data at 2 a.m. to meet a deadline or juggling freelance gigs on weekends. All they saw was the headline Derek had written for me guy who lucked into a comfortable life courtesy of his girlfriend. I thought about confronting him, just laying it out the whole truth and shutting him down. But there's a certain kind of man who thrives on that confrontation. It feeds their performance. And Derek was that kind of man. So instead, I started thinking about my long game. It began with small invisible moves. I started keeping a detailed log of my projects, not just the final deliverables, but the drafts, the timestamps, the data queries. I backed up everything to a private drive away from the company servers. And I started watching Derek more closely, noting which of my ideas ended up in his client decks. If he was going to paint me as dependent, I'd make sure the record showed who was really leaning on whom. Maya noticed the shift in me. "Something's going on," she said one night as we ate takeout on the couch. I hesitated. "It's nothing you need to worry about." "Mason." Her tone left no room for evasion. So I told her about the comment, the whispers, the slow erosion of how people saw me at work. She listened quiet, no interruption, and when I was done, she didn't get angry for me. She just looked at me and said, "Then don't fight him on his stage. Build your own." And that's when I knew exactly how this was going to end. Not with a shouting match in the break room, not with a petty HR complaint, but with something Derek couldn't spin or talk his way out of. The kind of ending that would make everyone in that office remember the day they laughed and realized they were laughing at the wrong man. If there's one thing office gossip teaches you, it's that stories grow teeth when you let them roam unchecked. Derek's little Mason lives off his girlfriend joke didn't stay a throwaway line. It multiplied, sharpened, and found its way into corners of the office I rarely set foot in. By the following Monday, I was getting those odd sidelong looks in the break room. Not hostile exactly, more like curious amusement. The kind of look people give when they think they've been let in on a secret you don't know they know. The whispers started small. I overheard one of the newer analysts in the hallway say, "Must be nice not worrying about rent," and her friend laughed like it was an inside joke. Someone else joked about how I could take longer lunches since the bills are already covered. It wasn't just talk, though. The sabotage started to creep in, so subtle most people would have chalked it up to coincidence. Files I'd prepared were mysteriously missing sections when I opened them before client calls. Reports I'd finished were suddenly incomplete because someone had replaced them with older drafts. My meeting invites occasionally didn't make it to my calendar. I'd seen this kind of thing before death by 1,000 cuts, and the worst part, unless you caught someone in the act, it was almost impossible to prove. So I made proving it my mission. First, I changed my workflow. Every draft I worked on now had a hidden signature, tiny adjustments in the formatting, harmless anomalies in data sets, version codes embedded in innocuous places. If Derek or anyone else tried to pass my work off as theirs, I'd be able to point to those markers without question. Second, I started mapping the rumor chain. It was almost funny in a dark way how predictably it moved. Derek would drop a remark during lunch. By the end of the day, someone in a completely different department would reference it in passing. The gossip didn't need me in the room. It carried itself. It wasn't just my pride on the line anymore. The way people saw me directly affected how they valued my work, and the more Derek's version of me spread, the easier it became for my contributions to be dismissed or claimed by someone else. The shift in behavior was subtle but real. In brainstorms, people who once backed my suggestions now hesitated, glancing toward Derek as if for approval. On projects, my name started slipping further down the email chains. The worst moment came on a Wednesday afternoon when I walked past the lounge and caught Derek mid-story to a group of interns. So yeah, Mason's got it all figured out. Why grind when someone else can pick up the slack, right? The group laughed, a few shaking their heads like they admired the hustle. That was the moment the fire in my chest stopped burning hot and started burning cold. I could have walked in, called him out, demanded an apology in front of everyone. But that would have made it about me being defensive, and defensive is just one step away from looking guilty. Instead, I kept walking. Straight past the lounge, straight to my desk, straight to my private log, where I added another entry. Rumor source, Derek date, time 2, 17 p.m. Audience 5 interns. Key phrase, why grind when someone else can pick up the slack? I didn't just want to shut Derek down. I wanted to make the collapse of his credibility so absolute that no one would ever think twice about which side of the story to believe. That night, Maya noticed I was quieter than usual. Bad day, she asked. Just clarifying some things, I said, trying to keep it light. She set her fork down. Mason, you're doing that thing where you think you can handle it without letting anyone help. I hesitated, then told her about the sabotage, the missing files, the switched drafts, the whispers to interns. She listened, her jaw tightening with each detail. You're playing a long game, she said finally. Just make sure it ends with you winning, not just surviving. Her words sat with me long after we'd cleaned up dinner. Winning didn't just mean proving Derek wrong. It meant turning the table so decisively that no one would dare try something like this again. And I already knew the first step toward that win. If Derek wanted to keep borrowing my work without giving credit, I'd let him. I'd make it easy. Because the more he took, the deeper he'd dig himself into a hole he didn't even know existed. By the time he realized it wouldn't just be his reputation on the line, it would be his job. If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. Derek didn't know it yet, but I'd already decided how this would play out. I wasn't going to corner him in some emotional shouting match or file a half-baked HR complaint that could be brushed off. I was going to let him keep building his own trap brick by brick until it was solid enough for him to lock himself inside. The first brick was patience. I stopped reacting to his digs completely. If he made a comment in a meeting, I'd jot down a note on my pad and move on to the next topic. In group chats, I responded to him with the same measured tone I used with clients, polite, even friendly. It drove him crazy. You could see it in the way he'd linger after delivering one of his jokes, waiting for me to bristle. But I never gave him that satisfaction. The second brick was presence. If Derek wanted to paint me as lazy or reliant, I'd make myself impossible to ignore for the right reasons. I started volunteering for the difficult, high-visibility assignments, the kind no one else wanted, because they were tedious or under tight deadlines. I made sure to deliver them early and with polish so thorough it left no room for fixes. And I started mentoring Liv, the summer intern assigned to our team. She was sharp, eager to learn, and Derek barely noticed her unless he needed busy work done. I took her under my wing, not out of charity, but because I knew her attention to detail could help me keep the receipts clean and airtight. The third brick was leverage. On paper, I was doing my job. Off the record, I picked up a side project with a boutique consulting firm, Nothing shady, just freelance analytics work for a client outside our industry. I didn't tell anyone at the office, but I knew the skills and case studies I'd get from it would be invaluable for what I had planned. It was through that side project that I started to notice a pattern. Derek had a habit of borrowing language, not just ideas, phrases, metaphors, and data points I'd used in internal emails, would resurface almost verbatim in his client presentations. To the untrained eye, it was coincidence. To me, it was the smoking gun taking shape. So I leaned into it. When preparing internal reports, I'd embed distinct examples, fabricated but harmless numbers, stylized turns of phrase that wouldn't damage anything if they leaked, but would be instantly recognizable if they appeared somewhere else. I started calling them ghost tags, and like clockwork, those ghost tags started popping up in Derek's decks. Liv noticed before I even mentioned it. "Hey, didn't you use this exact example in the trend report last week?" she whispered during a meeting as Derek presented. I just smiled. Funny how that happens, huh? By late summer, Derek was using so much of my inspiration that his work was essentially a collage of my ghost tags. The beauty of it was that he thought he was untouchable. He'd gotten so comfortable passing my work off as his own that he didn't even bother changing the language anymore. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for the opening. One Friday afternoon, the VP mentioned an upcoming high-profile pitch that could bring in one of the biggest accounts we'd seen all year. Derek immediately jumped in, offering to lead the presentation. Everyone agreed he had the confidence, the easy smile, the knack for winning over rooms. What he didn't have was original material. I volunteered to handle support analysis for the pitch, just the boring back-end work, nothing glamorous. Derek was too busy basking in the spotlight to question it, and as I sat at my desk that weekend compiling the pitch data, I wove in the most elegant set of ghost tags I'd ever created. Not clumsy or obvious, but layered so deeply into the flow of information that anyone who tried to claim it as theirs would be broadcasting my fingerprints in neon. By Monday morning, Derek had scooped up my draft with his usual flourish, tossing in a few buzzwords to make it sound like his voice. He didn't know it yet, but he just walked straight into the center of the web I'd been spinning for months. Now, all I had to do was wait for him to stand in front of the VP, the client, and half the leadership team and hand me the proof I needed on a silver platter. The day I caught Derek red-handed started like any other quiet, unassuming, the kind of morning that makes you think nothing out of the ordinary will happen. That's how I wanted it. I came in early, coffee in hand, and saw the email notification pop up, final pitch deck uploaded. Derek M. I clicked it immediately. There it was, my analysis, my visuals, my carefully woven ghost tags paraded under his name. He'd even lifted my unique phrasing from the opening slide. Consumer sentiment is less a wave to ride than a tide to understand. I'd invented that line on a sleepless night, staring at a half-finished dashboard. Now it was sitting in the deck as if Derek had thought of it over a glass of scotch. I could have stopped it then, could have marched into his office, deck in hand, and demanded he fix it before the meeting. But that would have robbed me of the one thing I'd been engineering for months, an audience. So I let it ride. The pitch was scheduled for Thursday. That gave me 4 days to make sure every last detail was locked down. I double-checked the ghost tags, making sure the harmless, fabricated data points were consistent and traceable. I stored the original files with timestamps saved both on a private drive and a cloud backup. Meanwhile, I watched Derek in the office strutting around like a man with the world in his pocket. He bragged to a few coworkers about how he'd pulled an all-nighter to craft the pitch, how he just had a knack for finding the perfect narrative. Every word he spoke was another length of rope. By Wednesday, Liv caught wind of it. She pulled me aside in the break room. "He's really gonna do it, isn't he?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "That's the idea." "You're not gonna warn him?" she asked. "No," I said, "because warnings give people a chance to run. I'm not giving him that." The morning of the pitch, the room was set VP at the head of the table. Client reps lined up along one side, our team on the other. Derek walked in wearing his best navy suit, beaming like he was about to receive an award. I sat down 2 seats away, silent, my laptop open to a private folder that contained every draft leading to this moment. Derek started strong. I'll give him that. His voice was smooth, his pacing confident. He hit all the right beats, made the client nod in places where they were supposed to. But as he moved deeper into the presentation, I started to see my ghost tags flash like bright signals, unique color codes and charts, oddly specific fictional examples I'd created, even that one harmless fake metric embedded in the case study. The client seemed impressed. The VP seemed impressed. But the real show wasn't for them. It was for later when the questions would come and I'd be ready. When Derek wrapped up, the VP congratulated him and suggested we share the deck internally for future reference. Perfect. That meant it would be circulated, time-stamped, and preserved, my fingerprints locked in for everyone to see. After the meeting, Derek basked in the praise, shaking hands, grinning like he'd just closed the deal of the century. I congratulated him too, because nothing unsettles a man like kindness when he's expecting competition. That afternoon, I pulled up the shared company drive and made sure the final deck was there unaltered. Then I exported my own file history, every draft, every timestamp, every email, where I'd shared preliminary findings with Derek. It was a complete airtight trail, and the best part, he'd done the heavy lifting of presenting it as his own. All that was left now was to let him keep walking right up to the point where the floor would give way beneath him. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Maya, the glow of my laptop screen washing the room in cool light. She was sketching a new concept for one of her firm's projects, but I could feel her attention shift to me every few minutes. "You've got that look," she said, finally setting her pencil down. "The one you get when you've planned something down to the last screw." I smirked. "Maybe I have." She arched an eyebrow. "Is this about Derek?" "Of course it's about Derek," I said, leaning back in my chair. "He's going to walk into this like it's his big moment, and I'm going to let him, but when it's done, there'll be no mistaking whose work it was." Maya smiled faintly, but there was something serious in her eyes. "I don't want you to win just to prove him wrong. I want you to win because you know your own worth. Remember that." Her words hit somewhere deeper than I expected. I realized that for months this hadn't just been about Derek's jabs. It was about the way those jabs had chipped away at my own belief in what I'd earned. The next day, I doubled down. While Derek soaked up the post-pitch glow, I started planting seeds. In casual conversations with colleagues, I dropped mentions of the preliminary research phase and how I approached the early data builds, never accusing, just talking, as though everyone already knew I'd been the one steering the ship before Derek took the wheel. Liv helped too, in her own subtle way. She'd chime in during team chats, recalling moments when she'd worked with me on those early drafts or the first model runs. Nothing inflammatory, just facts that quietly contradicted Derek's narrative. By Friday, the client had responded to the pitch with interest, asking for additional breakdowns on certain data points. The VP assigned Derek to deliver them by Monday. That's when I knew the perfect storm was forming. Those certain data points were ghost tags, fake harmless numbers that only I knew how to replace with real ones. If Derek tried to expand on them without my input, he'd hit a wall. And if he came to me for help, he'd be admitting, at least privately, that the work wasn't really his. Sure enough, Saturday morning, my phone buzzed. Derek. "Hey man," he started way too casual for a weekend call. "The client's asking for more detail on those trend metrics. Any chance you could shoot me over your original sheets?" I played dumb. "Original sheets?" "Yeah, you know, the baseline stuff you pulled when you started looking at the data." "Can't remember exactly what you're talking about," I said, "but I'm sure whatever you've got will work fine. You're the one who built it, right?" There was a pause on the line, just long enough for me to know he'd felt it. "I'll figure it out," he muttered before hanging up. By Monday, the cracks were showing. In the follow-up meeting with the client, Derek stumbled over explanations for the fabricated metrics. When they pressed him for sources, he danced around the answers, promising to circle back with the details. That was when I stepped in. "Actually," I said evenly, "I can provide the original datasets. I was the one who ran the initial models before Derek's final assembly." The room went still. The VP glanced between us, eyebrows raised. Derek laughed it off, saying we'd collaborated, but the look in his eyes told me he knew exactly where this was going. That night when I got home, Maya was waiting with takeout and a knowing grin. "You dropped the first domino, didn't you?" she said. I nodded, and the rest are lined up just waiting for the push. Because now, it wasn't just me who knew the truth. Everyone had seen the first fracture in Derek's perfect facade, and I was ready to make the rest of it collapse in full view. The fracture widened faster than I expected. By midweek, Derek was in over his head. The client had emailed again, this time directly to the VP, asking for clarification on several sections of the pitch. Those sections, of course, were built entirely from my ghost tags. They weren't just asking for numbers, they wanted the methodology, the sources, the reasoning. That meant Derek had two options: admit he didn't create those parts of the work, attempt to fake the reasoning and risk looking incompetent. He chose the second. I watched the disaster unfold in real time. Derek pulled together a hasty supplemental report filled with surface-level stats and vague justifications. He even copy-pasted a paragraph from one of my older unrelated reports, probably thinking no one would notice. The problem was, I noticed, and so did the client. By Thursday morning, the VP called for a quick sync meeting with the core team. It wasn't quick. The tension in that glass-walled conference room was thick enough to chew. The VP started politely. Derek, the client, says some of the supplemental analysis didn't match the logic of the original presentation. Can you walk us through your process? Derek cleared his throat. Sure, well, I built on the initial framework. That initial framework was mine. I cut in smoothly, not looking at him. I'm happy to walk through it if that helps. The VP glanced at me. Go ahead. I connected my laptop to the screen and pulled up my archived drafts, timestamps, metadata email threads to Derek labeled Initial Findings for your review. I explained every choice I'd made, every data set I'd pulled, every reason behind each ghost tag. I spoke clearly, steadily, as though I were explaining to a client who'd paid for my expertise, which in a way I was. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Derek shift in his seat, jaw tightening. When I finished, the VP leaned back. That's very thorough. And you sent all this to Derek before the pitch? Yes, I said. He did an excellent job presenting it. I meant it as a dagger sheathed in velvet. The words sounded complimentary, but the implication was impossible to miss. Derek's role was cosmetic. The meeting ended with the VP saying we'd discuss internally how to proceed. That was corporate speak for someone's about to be in trouble. Afterward, in the hallway, Derek caught up to me. What the hell was that? He hissed. That was clarity, I said. You should try it sometime. His face darkened, but he didn't say another word. By Friday, the whispers in the office had shifted. I could feel eyes on me again, but they were different this time, measuring, reevaluating. People who'd once bought Derek's version of me were suddenly piecing together that maybe they'd been wrong. That night, Maya and I sat on the couch with takeout again, her legs curled under her. You look lighter, she said. I think the tide's turning, I replied, but it's not over yet. He's still got just enough credibility to spin this if I let up. She gave me a slow, proud smile. Then don't let up. I didn't plan to, because I knew the next step would be the one Derek couldn't recover. From the moment where the evidence wouldn't just be in the room, it would be undeniable to everyone watching. And I already knew exactly when and where it would happen. The opportunity came faster than I expected. The VP called a department-wide meeting to review recent project successes and share strategies that had worked well. It was exactly the kind of event Derek loved: broad audience, minimal scrutiny, perfect for grandstanding. And predictably, he volunteered to present the client pitch as a case study in winning big accounts. I could almost see the gears turning in his head. He thought this was his redemption arc. I kept my expression neutral as I said, great idea. I'll join you for the Q&A portion. Might be useful to have the data lead on hand. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Derek's face, unease, but he smoothed it over quickly. Sure, man, whatever you think will help. What he didn't know was that in the days before the meeting, I'd been quietly collecting the last pieces of my case. Every ghost tag from the pitch had been cataloged in a clean side-by-side comparison between my original drafts and his final deck. I'd even added metadata screenshots showing when each file was created, modified, and by whom. Liv, bless her detail-oriented soul, had gone one step further. She dug through her own emails to find the messages where I'd CC'd her on early drafts, complete with my notes explaining the purpose behind those data quirks. By the morning of the presentation, the evidence was as airtight as it could get. The meeting started in the big conference room, glass walls gleaming in the afternoon light. Derek stood at the front, radiating confidence as he clicked through the slides. He told the story of the pitch like he'd been the mastermind from start to finish. People nodded along, impressed. Then came the Q&A. One of the senior managers raised a hand. That consumer sentiment analysis was unique. Can you explain how you arrived at those particular metrics? Derek hesitated, his eyes darting to me. I smiled politely. I can take that one. I stood and connected my laptop to the screen, pulling up the original dataset. The methodology was based on a hybrid model I developed before the deck was finalized. I embedded a few unconventional indicators to test predictive accuracy. You'll notice these markers. I zoomed in, highlighting the ghost tags. Are present in both my preliminary drafts and the final pitch. A murmur rippled through the room. I flipped to the side-by-side comparison slide. Here's the timeline created in my workspace at 11:47 p.m., shared with Derek the next morning, and incorporated into his deck 2 days later. The VP leaned forward, studying the screen. So you were the originator of this analysis? Yes, I said evenly. Derek did an excellent job delivering it, but the underlying framework and data modeling were mine. I let the silence hang for a beat long enough for the weight of that statement to settle in. Derek tried to recover. We collaborated. Collaboration implies both parties contribute original work, I said, still calm. In this case, the record shows otherwise. You could feel the shift in the room. People weren't nodding anymore. They were watching Derek with narrowed eyes, reassessing everything they'd heard from him over the past few months. The VP thanked us both, but there was an edge in her tone when she dismissed the meeting. By the end of the day, I got the email. Please join me for a follow-up discussion tomorrow morning regarding project authorship and credit. Derek was copied. When I left the office, Maya was waiting in the car. She didn't need to ask how it went. One look at my face and she knew. You lit the match, she said as I climbed in. I smiled. And tomorrow, we watch it burn. The follow-up discussion was set for 9 a.m. in one of the smaller glass-walled conference rooms, too intimate for Derek to perform, too exposed for him to hide. I arrived early, laptop and folder in hand, not because I needed more prep, but because I wanted to be sitting there calm and ready when he walked in. I wanted him to feel like he was stepping onto my ground, not the other way around. He came in 5 minutes late wearing the same navy suit from the big pitch, though it looked a little more rumpled this time. He avoided my eyes and sat opposite me, fiddling with his watch strap. The VP entered last, shutting the door behind her. Let's get right to it, she said. There's been a question raised about who originated the analysis in our recent client pitch. I want clarity today. I kept my voice even. I have all the documentation, drafts, timestamps, email threads, and even data markers unique to my workflow. They appear in the final pitch exactly as I created them. I turned my laptop to face her and walked her through the timeline. The more I spoke, the more Derek sank into his chair. When it was his turn, he tried to spin. Look, Mason's great with the numbers, no one's disputing that, but I was shaping the overall story. This isn't about the story arc, the VP interrupted. It's about authorship. Did you create this analysis, yes or no? His mouth opened, then closed. I adapted it. The VP's expression hardened. That's not what you presented to the client. Silence. The hum of the air conditioner filled the space between us. Finally, she turned to me. Mason, moving forward, you'll have lead credit on analytics for all client-facing material, and I want you to formalize your process so there's no ambiguity about contributions. Then to Derek, we'll need to have a separate conversation about professional conduct. For now, I'm reassigning you from high-visibility pitches until further notice. It was a polite way of saying you're benched. He nodded stiffly, eyes fixed on the table. The meeting ended, and the VP left with her laptop under her arm. I stayed seated as Derek stood clearly ready to bolt. Guess you'll have to find a new story to tell about me, I said quietly. He didn't answer, just walked out, his shoulders tighter than I'd ever seen them. That afternoon, something shifted in the office air. People who'd kept their distance started stopping by my desk again, asking for my input, looping me into conversations. Liv dropped off a coffee without a word, just a small smile. Maya called at lunch. So I said, he's off the stage. For good if I had to guess. It wasn't the loud dramatic takedown some people might imagine, but that was never the goal. The goal was to take away his ability to rewrite my story. And in that quiet clinical conference room, I had done exactly that. Still, I knew Derek wasn't done trying to save face. Men like him rarely walk away without a last swing, and I was ready for it. The last swing came sooner than I thought. 2 weeks later, the VP called another cross-functional review, this time to showcase collaborative wins across departments. Derek must have seen it as his shot at regaining some ground, because he volunteered to present on a smaller project we'd both touched, though my role had been minimal. I wasn't worried until I heard from Liv the day before. He's telling people you only got lead credit on the big pitch because you pulled some kind of HR stunt, she said, voice tight with frustration. That you made a big deal out of nothing to make him look bad. It was almost laughable. Almost. But the danger in lies isn't their absurdity, it's how easily they stick when told with enough confidence. So I decided to cut him off at the knees publicly, and in the most indisputable way possible. The next morning, the review kicked off with a full room. Department heads, project leads, even the VP of operations, all there. Derek took the floor, strutting again, his voice smooth as he spun his narrative. He kept glancing at me as if daring me to interrupt. When he wrapped, the VP asked if there were any questions. I raised my hand. Just to add context, I began standing slowly Derek's right, that we collaborated, but since the last review, I've been standardizing our attribution process. That means everything we present now comes with a clear time-stamped contribution log. I pulled up the shared screen and opened the internal dashboard. There was my system listing every contributor to every project, their roles and percentage of input, based on tracked edits and submissions. It was cold, hard data, and it wasn't on Derek's side. For this project, I continued, Derek handled 82% of the client-facing content, while my role was a brief consult on 2 analytics points. Just as for the previous pitch, the logs show the opposite pattern. I clicked, and the numbers for the big pitch appeared: 91% of the work attributed to me, 9% to Derek. No adjectives, no accusations, just raw proof. A quiet wave went through the room. People leaned toward each other, murmuring. The VP of Operations asked, "And this process is now standard?" "Yes," I said. "It ensures recognition matches contribution, nothing more, nothing less." The VP nodded approvingly. "Good. Transparency is critical." Derek didn't speak for the rest of the meeting. Afterward, as people filed out, the VP clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Smart move, Mason. Keep building systems like that and we'll have fewer misunderstandings and better work." I didn't miss the way Derek lingered near the back eyes, darting toward me, his face pale. He knew what I'd just done, taken away his ability to ever quietly siphon off my work again. That night, Maya and I celebrated with takeout again. "I think you just took away his last weapon," she said between bites. "Not just his," I replied. "Anyone who tries that with me from now on." Because in that meeting, I hadn't just defended myself. I'd changed the rules of the game entirely. And Derek. He was still stuck playing by the old ones. Derek's decline wasn't a cliff drop. It was erosion. Slow, steady, relentless. From the outside, it might have looked like nothing was happening. He still showed up every day, still wore the sharp suit, still tried to maintain that easy grin in the hallways. But if you'd been watching him as closely as I had, you could see it. The little signs were there first. The way he'd linger by the coffee machine a beat too long, pretending to scroll on his phone while listening to conversations he wasn't part of. The way he stopped laughing quite as loudly in the lounge, his eyes darting to see who was paying attention. The way his friends at work, the ones who used to eat up his stories, started finding reasons to sit elsewhere. It was the loss of the spotlight that really got to him. Before Derek thrived on visibility, he was the guy who always volunteered for the big presentations, the high-stakes pitches, the all-hands showcases. He lived for the applause and the perception of being the guy who could own a room. Now, that stage had been taken away. The VP's reassignment of his responsibilities wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet demotion, the kind that doesn't make the gossip channels explode, but still lands like a stone in the gut. She didn't frame it as punishment. She framed it as restructuring responsibilities to play to strengths. But everyone knew what it meant. He'd gone from fronting multi-million-dollar client proposals to being tasked with secondary accounts, smaller clients with smaller budgets, and most importantly, less visibility. He wasn't in the high-stakes rooms anymore. And if you're a man who defines himself by being in those rooms, being shut out of them is a slow death. But here's the thing. I didn't go out of my way to pile on. I didn't need to. The systems I'd set up, the attribution logs, the project contribution, tracking the habit of time-stamping every piece of work, were quietly doing all the work for me. From now on, if Derek tried to ride someone else's work, the system would show exactly how much he'd contributed. There was no way around it, no loophole to slip through. It was airtight, and that wasn't just about Derek, it was about the culture. I'd been in enough workplaces to know that people like Derek weren't rare. There's always at least one a smooth talker who knows how to sniff out other people's work and dress it up as their own. They survive because proving it is messy, emotional, and often not worth the political fallout. But once you make proof the default, once you build a system where the facts are plain and visible, those people can't operate in the shadows anymore. That's what I'd done, and Derek knew it. Still, I wasn't entirely satisfied, not because I wanted to humiliate him further, but because there was one part of the damage that hadn't been addressed, yet the personal. The months of Mason's living off his girlfriend jokes whispered behind my back and in rooms I wasn't in, those weren't just petty. They'd cost me credibility. They'd made colleagues think twice about my work, created just enough doubt for Derek to slip in and steal pieces of it without raising alarm. And that's what I wanted on record, not for revenge, but for accountability. So I scheduled a one-on-one with the VP. I didn't walk in with a list of complaints or demands. I kept my tone measured, my language precise. I'm not here to talk about Derek specifically, I began, but I do want to address something that came out of this whole situation. The narrative that I was financially dependent on someone else. It might have sounded like harmless teasing to some people, but it undermined trust in my work. And once that trust erodes, it affects the company too. The VP leaned back, listening carefully. I've seen firsthand how fast a rumor can become a reason to overlook someone's contributions, I continued. And while I was able to prove my case this time, it could just as easily have gone another way. I think we need a policy, something that makes it clear that personal rumors have no place in professional evaluation. She nodded slowly. I agree. I'll bring it up at the leadership meeting. We've been overdue for a conversation about workplace culture and boundaries. It wasn't a dramatic victory, but it was the kind that sticks, the kind that months from now would be part of a formal guideline. And for me, that was enough. Outside of work, things were changing too. Maya and I finally found a new place to live, one that was ours, not hers, with me as a guest. We picked it together, signed the lease together, and split the bills without even thinking about it. It might seem small, but it mattered to me. The story Derek had tried to sell, that I was coasting on Maya's support, wasn't just wrong, it was insulting to both of us. Now everything about our home reflected the truth: partnership, not dependence. I remember one night sitting on the floor among half-unpacked boxes eating takeout straight from the containers. Maya leaned back against the couch and gave me a long look. You know, she said, I think you handled this better than I would have. I would have stormed into that office months ago and told everyone exactly what was what. I smiled, and you would have been amazing at it. She laughed, shaking her head. Maybe, but I like your way better. You didn't just beat him, you rewrote the rules so it can't happen again. Back at the office, Derek's world kept shrinking. His name rarely appeared on big project emails. He stopped getting tapped for special assignments. I even heard from someone in another department that the VP had quietly advised project leads to keep him on a short leash with client materials. His desk started to look different too. The framed photo of him at a conference podium gone. The stack of flashy business books he used to keep on the corner disappeared. His workspace went from being a billboard of look at me energy to something almost nondescript, like he was trying to fade into the background. And maybe he was. The man who once strutted through the halls now moved quickly, head down, no unnecessary stops. His booming voice in the lounge was replaced by quick lunches eaten alone at his desk. I didn't take pleasure in watching him shrink exactly, but I did feel something close to closure, because in a way, Derek had done this to himself. All I'd done was make sure there was light on the truth. Still, I knew people like him don't disappear quietly. There's always a final act, a last attempt to claw back some dignity. I didn't have to wait long to see it. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I overheard him talking to one of the newer hires. He was leaning against her desk, saying something about how some people get ahead by knowing who to complain to, while others just focus on the work. It wasn't subtle. He didn't use my name, but he didn't have to. The old me might have confronted him then and there, but instead, I waited. Later that day, I made a point of casually mentioning to the new hire that if she ever had questions about how credit was assigned, she could check the contribution logs on the shared drive. I even walked her through them, showing how they worked, how every person's edits and submissions were tracked. She didn't say anything about Derek's earlier comment, but I could see the understanding click in her eyes. And that's when I realized I didn't need to fight Derek anymore. The system itself was my defense. He could try to spin his version of the story all he wanted. Anyone with a brain and access to the logs would see the truth. It was around that time that my own role started to shift in a way I hadn't anticipated. The VP asked me to lead a lean client insights pod, a small team focused on delivering deep analysis for high-value accounts. It meant more autonomy, more direct contact with clients, and more responsibility. It also meant I was now in a position to mentor others the way I had mentored Liv, teaching them not just the technical skills, but how to protect their work, how to navigate office politics without getting pulled into pointless fights. I knew firsthand how dangerous it could be to let someone else control your narrative, and I wasn't about to let that happen to anyone on my team. One Friday afternoon, as I was packing up to leave, I caught sight of Derek across the office. He was sitting at his desk, staring at his monitor, his posture slouched. For a moment, I thought about walking over. about saying something like, "We could have worked well together if you just..." But I didn't, because the truth was this wasn't about us working together anymore. It wasn't even about me and him. It was about the lesson he taught me unintentionally that I'd carry into every job, every project, every collaboration. From now on, protect your work, protect your name, and never ever let someone else be the author of your story. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that there was one last scene left in this story. One last moment where Derek would have to face me not as his rival, not as the guy he could out-talk in the break room, but as the person who'd quietly dismantled his entire game. I didn't know when it would happen, but I knew it would, and I was ready for it. It happened on a Tuesday morning, gray light spilling through the office windows, the kind of day where even the coffee felt tired. I was deep into building a model for one of our new high-profile accounts when I noticed Derek walking toward my desk. He wasn't moving with that old swagger anymore. No quick, confident strides, no smirk ready to deploy. He looked smaller. Shoulders hunched, jaw tight, eyes fixed somewhere just beyond me, like he wasn't sure he wanted to go through with this. "Got a minute?" he asked when he reached me. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my tone even. "Sure." We stepped into one of the side rooms, those small glass-walled spaces meant for private conversations that weren't meant to last long. He closed the door but didn't sit down. Instead, he stood a couple feet away, hands buried in his pockets, staring at the carpet like it might offer him an answer. "I heard I'm being moved to another team," he said after a moment. "Smaller accounts, no client-facing stuff." It wasn't a question. He knew it was true. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I just waited. He shifted his weight, exhaled sharply. Guess I shouldn't be surprised. Still, I said nothing. Finally, he looked up. His eyes were tired, the fight gone from them. "Look, I know I crossed lines, took things I shouldn't have, and I figured I could talk my way around it like I always have. But you didn't let me." It wasn't quite an apology. It was more like an admission, the kind that costs a man like Derek something to say. "I didn't have to," I replied quietly. The work spoke for itself. I just made sure people could hear it. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah, you did." There was another pause, heavier this time. He seemed like he wanted to say more, but whatever it was, he swallowed it. Without another word, he turned, opened the door, and walked out. It was over in less than 2 minutes. 1 week later, the company-wide email came through: subject staff update body Derek Lawson will be leaving the firm to pursue other opportunities. His last day will be Friday. We thank him for his contributions and wish him the best in his future endeavors. Standard corporate phrasing, polite, non-committal, and absolutely final. The office reacted the way offices always do: brief flurry of messages, a few raised eyebrows in the hall, then back to business. There was no big farewell gathering, no slideshow of his greatest hits, just a quiet departure. I didn't see him on his last day. Work moved on without him. Projects rolled and deadlines loomed, and my new role leading the Client Insights pod took up more of my energy than I'd expected. It was the kind of work I'd wanted for a long time, strategic, impactful, and mine to shape. The attribution system I'd built was now standard company procedure. Every project had a clear, time-stamped record of who contributed what. It didn't just protect me, it protected everyone, and it subtly shifted the culture. People started being more intentional about collaboration, giving credit where it was due. It was a small but noticeable change, and every time I saw a junior analyst get recognized for their work without having to fight for it, I felt a quiet satisfaction. That was the real victory. Derek leaving was just the byproduct. Outside of work, life with Maya had settled into an easy rhythm. Our new place was starting to feel like home walls filling with art books stacked in the living room, her drafting table by the big window where the afternoon light poured in. The bills were paid from a joint account. No conversation needed, no awkward mental tally of who owed what. One night we had dinner out on the balcony. City lights blinked in the distance, and the faint hum of traffic below made everything feel alive. "You know," she said, leaning back in her chair when he first started those rumors, "I wanted to march into your office and set everyone straight myself." I smiled. "You would have made quite the entrance." She laughed, then grew more serious. "But I'm glad you did it your way. You didn't just beat him, you changed the rules. That's harder to do." I thought about that for a long moment. She was right. Derek had tried to define me, to put me in a box labeled dependent, a man coasting on someone else's effort. But in the end, I hadn't just broken out of the box. I'd taken away the pen he'd used to label it. In quieter moments, I found myself reflecting on the path that had led here. If I'd confronted him too soon, I might have looked defensive or petty. If I'd let it slide too long, I might have lost the credibility I needed to prove my point. The timing had been everything, letting him take enough rope without realizing I'd been weaving it into a noose. But the most important thing, I never made it about revenge for revenge's sake. Every step I took had been about control of the narrative, of my work, of my professional standing. And once I had that control back, the rest took care of itself. Derek had been the loud one, but in the end, the quiet moves were what lasted. The following month, I ran into one of the interns who'd been in the lounge the day Derek had made one of his early Mason's living off his girlfriend jokes. She was working full-time now in another department. "Hey," she said, "I wanted to tell you, I really respect how you handled all that with Derek. You didn't blow up, you just showed everyone the truth." It caught me off guard. "Thanks," I said. I figured letting the facts do the talking was the best move. She smiled. It was. People remember that. It was a simple exchange, but it stuck with me. Because she was right, people do remember. Maybe not the details of every meeting or every project, but they remember who kept their integrity when it mattered. They remember who could be trusted to tell the truth without dressing it up in self-serving spin. That's when I realized something important. This whole mess with Derek had given me more than just vindication. It had given me a reputation. Not the kind you build with loud self-promotion, but the kind you earn slowly, piece by piece, until it's just part of how people see you. And that reputation, that I was fair, that I was thorough, that I gave credit where it was due, would follow me far longer than Derek's rumors ever could. Still, if I'm being honest, there was a part of me that wondered how Derek saw it now. Did he think I'd been ruthless? Lucky? Did he still tell himself some story where he was the wronged one? I never got the answer. And maybe that's for the best. Because the truth is, it doesn't matter. His opinion doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change the fact that I'm here in a stronger position than before, and he's somewhere else starting over. What matters is that I own my work, my name, and my story, and I'm never letting anyone else hold the pen again. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that you don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to match someone's volume to beat them. Sometimes the quietest moves, the patient documentation, the calm explanations, the systems that make fairness, the default, are the ones that echo the longest. So if you've ever had someone try to rewrite your story, remember this: the truth doesn't need to be flashy. It just needs to be undeniable. And when you put it in the right light, it will speak for itself. I took back my story. Now it's yours. Have you ever had to reclaim your name after someone tried to twist it? Share it in the comments. And if you want more stories like this about the small, deliberate wins that change everything, subscribe to Ethan's Way. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't a loud victory. It's the quiet proof that you were right all along.